All right, well, I'm going to try to explain balance sheets here for you today. So let's start with the basics. Say that we have, I don't know, Bob. All right. Bob wants to start a bank of Bob, but he doesn't have any money. So first thing Bob has got to do is Bob has got to get a loan from someone else, from a bank, whatever, doesn't really matter. So in order for Bob to get a loan, he has got to give something to the bank, to the lender. Let's say he gets a loan from his friend Tim. Okay, so Tim gives Bob a nice $1 million loan. Now what Bob has is a bad pen. Additionally, what Bob has is $1 million in assets. He's holding on to $1 million. However, that $1 million technically isn't his. It's Tim's. And if Bob is to spend that $1 million or do anything with that, then he has got to owe Tim. So either he can promise Tim to pay him back or whatever. Most likely, Tim is going to have what we call capital stock or share in the company. So we'll do that. All right, so this is a balance sheet. As you can see, the assets, which is A, and liabilities, which is L, need to balance out. He's got $1 million in cash, but Tim's got $1 million of ownership of whatever company, whatever Bob does with it, or he has to pay him back. Either way. Okay, so that's the general thrust of the balance sheet, that for every asset that Bob or the bank that he creates has, there's going to be a liability associated with it. So they must always balance. All right, so Bob's got $1 million. Now, the first thing he needs to do is not give out loans because he's got no mechanism to give out those loans. So what Bob needs to do is actually purchase a building of some sort. So Bob buys a $1 million building and renovates it and so on and so forth. So the $1 million in cash goes away. But what replaces it is $1 million in property. And hopefully a better pen. 1 mil. Okay, there you go. Got it? So we still balance. $1 million here, $1 million here. You get the idea. All right, so now Bob has a bank. The Bank of Bob. Or BOB, whatever you want to call it. This bank has $1 million. Or it doesn't. It has $1 million in property and $1 million in capital stock as the liability, but no actual cash. So if you were to walk into the Bank of Bob and want to get a loan, you couldn't because it doesn't have any money. It's just got the property. The only way in which Bank of Bob could actually issue the loan is to sell the property and give you the loan, which is kind of counterproductive. So the first thing that the bank needs to do is get some cash to loan out. Because banks, while they accept your loans or your deposits and all that other stuff, they really exist to give out loans. That's where they make the most of their money, on fees and stuff like that, but also on loans. You generally interact with banks as a place to keep your money. And that's really good for you. But the reason why they want to keep your money is so they can loan it out and turn a profit on it. All right, so let us say that George, sure, why not? George walks into the Bank of Bob and trusts the Bank of Bob and says, you know what, I'm going to deposit $1,000. All right, so George gives the Bank of Bob $1,000. Now the Bank of Bob, once again, has $1,000 in cash, right? Okay, cool. They've got it. They've got George's money. If they wanted to go to the racetrack with it, there's not much that George can do to stop it. He could sue them afterwards, but they're actually physically in possession of George's $1,000. The liability that's associated with that, though, is when George deposits that money, he gets an account. So we're going to call that a checking account, or you call it a checking account. For the AP test, they actually call it demand deposits because they're available on demand. So demand deposits of $1,000. Okay, so now we have 1 million, 1,000, 1 million, 1,000. We still balance. Cool. All right. So now the bank can actually issue loans, which is what they wanted to do in the first place to make money. They're going to loan out George's money to someone else. And this is where we get when the book talks about, or when any video you've ever seen or any review, when they talk about creating money and the money multiplier, this is where this comes in right here. Watch. So let's say Steve, we're running out of room here. I promise I'll get better at this as I do more of them. All right, so Steve, so Bob, let's see. Steve walks into the bank of Bob and says, you know what? I'd like $1,000 loan. Bank of Bob says, cool. Actually, the Bank of Bob can't give the full $1,000 out. So let's say, just for fun, Steve wants a $900 loan. I'll explain why in a later video. But Steve wants a $900 loan. The Bank of Bob says, sure, I can do that. Because remember, they have this $1,000 right here in cash. They can loan it out. So they give Steve $1,000. Okay? So instead of actually giving Steve, or 900, I'm sorry. Like I said, I'm a bit crap. I'll get better at this. As they give money to Steve, they don't actually give him the money. What they're actually going to do is give Steve a checking account and put $1,000 or $900 in it. So now we have, so this is George's money. Okay, so now we have $1,000 demand deposits for George. We're now going to have demand deposits in the amount of $900 for Steve. All right, so like when we got our home loan, they didn't just hand us a stack of hundreds of thousands of dollars. They created an account, and then we use that account to write a check to buy our home. So that's what's happening. They're basically giving Steve a bank account. They're putting $900 in that bank account, and Steve can go out and write a check against that bank account or use an ATM or whatever. But notice that at this time, this money, this $900 here, belongs simultaneously to Steve and George. George didn't lose that money. George didn't give the bank authorization to give away his money. So if George walked into the bank and wanted to deposit or wanted to withdraw it, the bank needs to come up with it. It actually belongs to George, but it also belongs to Steve. So on this side, what's the asset? Why would the bank do this? Because they get an IOU from Steve. If Steve gives him $900, if he gives Steve $900, Steve's going to give them back $1,000, $1,200, depending on the interest rate. But for now, we're just going to put an IOU and we're going to call it a loan of $900. Now we have 1,001,900, 1,001,900. Got it? We balance. We actually have $900 more than we started with. We actually created $900 out of thin air. And this process will continue. Wherever Steve spends his money, that person's going to deposit the $1,000. And that, or the $900, and then some of that'll get loaned out, and so on and so forth, and so on and so forth. But that's for a different video. For now, I just wanted you to understand kind of how this works, and so that you know what the balance sheet looks like. And then in the next video, I'm just going to go over all the things that could appear on a normal bank's balance sheet on one side or the other.